often in the wake of municipal tragedy, a public figure cannot do anything right. If a mayor goes to a hospital where a policeman has been shot, he can be accused of exploiting the nightmare for political gain. If he stays away, he can be accused of ignoring his city's debt to the fallen officer. But on our third story in the countdown, if the tragedy is in South Carolina and the politicians who go to the scene include an ex-mayor from New York, senators from Connecticut and Delaware, and a Homeland Security Secretary from Washington who inexplicably brings up terrorism, the stench of pure politics is a lot more pure and a lot more putrid. Thousands of firefighters came from all over the country to Charleston, South Carolina today, mourning 9 of their brothers who died in the collapse of the burning furniture store on Monday. The salute to their comrades and the comforting of their families done as much with pride as with sorrow. The 9 deaths, the worst one-day loss of life for firefighters since the deaths of 343 New York firefighters on 9/11. And it is the very thread that had the potential to turn the ceremony from honor to exploitation. One of the speakers, Homeland Secretary Chertoff.
The tragedy of Monday reminds us that we live in a world in which danger is all around us, from accidents to natural disasters to deliberate acts of terror.
Adding to the political presence, a handful of presidential candidates. Democrat John Edwards from the neighboring state of North Carolina, but also Senators Joe Biden and Chris Dodd. Among the Republicans, Mike Huckabee and Rudy Giuliani, whose campaign, of course, runs to the drumbeat of repeating 9/11. MSNBC confirming that Giuliani had originally been scheduled to speak at the event, invited by Jim Bowie, who directed the memorial, and also heads the South Carolina Firefighters Association, which has endorsed Giuliani. The Giuliani speech apparently scrubbed when the International Association of Firefighters objected to making the event a stage for the man they do not consider to be a hero of 9/11 nor a friend to firefighters. Joining us now to talk about the line between pathos and politics, Air America radio host Rachel Maddow. Rachel, thanks for your time tonight.
Hi, Keith. Thanks.
The fact that the Homeland Security Secretary would have a connection with first responders, I guess, is fair enough. But Secretary Chertoff couldn't resist mentioning terrorism. And what was Rudy Giuliani going to speak about? Well,
it seems like Giuliani was going to speak because somebody involved with his campaign was involved in setting up the event. And it's sad, and everybody knows it, but it bears repeating that Rudy Giuliani's whole post-mayoral life has been about wrapping himself up in 9/11 and wrapping himself up specifically in the heroism of the people who died on 9/11 trying to rescue others. It's been the basis of his consulting gig. It's been the basis of all his paid speeches. And it's now the basis of his presidential campaign. And so they saw this as an opportunity for him once again to campaign almost as if he is a firefighter, which, as you noted, is awkward given that New York firefighters are among his most vociferous critics.
The wife of Democratic candidate Bill Richardson was also there. We mentioned that that makes 5 presidential candidates or their representatives. Was there a desire to show sympathy, or was this somehow a campaign necessity, or was there a pack mentality among their handlers?
It's interesting. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with showing respects and with sitting in the back of the room and not setting out a press release about the fact that you're there and being there as a way to pay respects. I mean, it is true that firefighters, when they lose their brothers and their sisters in accidents like this and fires like this, they do come from all over the place to attend these funerals. It's the same thing with police officers. And so for elected officials to say, I would also like to show my respects, that's all right, as long as they're not there to make it about themselves, as long as they're not there to speak at the event, as long as they're not there to make it part of their campaign. Being a politically potent symbol isn't always a practically great deal. It kind of reminds me of when developing countries discover oil and they realize, well, we might benefit from this in some way, but we might also get invaded. It's the same thing with our troops and our veterans, realizing that support the troops has become a mantra. Okay, well, that makes it something that people repeat a lot and use as a political epithet, but it doesn't make sure that veterans or our troops are treated any better. It's the same thing with first responders post 9/11. They've become very politically potent, but it hasn't turned into more funding and support for first responders. Firefighters and police officers in New York City still aren't talking to each other on radios that are compatible this long after 9/11, no matter how many politicians have wrapped themselves up in that legacy.
And sort of tangential to that, Mr. Giuliani by himself made this a political event. So did we learn something significant politically then? I mean, the International Association of Firefighters insisting on him not speaking at this. Its website has nothing good to say about him. They specifically blame him for disrespecting 9/11 firefighters by ending the search for remains too early. Would that be a surprise to most people? And is this the point at which some of the realities of that 9/11 cloak that he cloaks himself in may come to the fore?
I think the Giuliani campaign, if they want to really go for it, if they really want this campaign to be more than just something that ups his speaking fee even further, they're going to have to broaden his appeal beyond him still talking about 9/11, because it is very uncomfortable that every time he shows up, for example, in New York, he's dogged by New York firefighters who are complaining and campaigning against him. I mean, there's a lot of things that are wrong with Rudy Giuliani's candidacy. I mean, you can start with the annulment of the marriage to his cousin and go right through Bernie Kerik and on to profiteering off 9/11 instead of going to the Iraq Study Group report. I mean, study group meetings. There's a lot of things wrong with Giuliani's candidacy, but the real heroes of 9/11 campaigning against him as he continues to run on the basis of 9/11 is ultimately going to be a real bad ending for him.
Yeah, and there were those two headlines in the last 2 days that just don't seem to fit either. He didn't want to politicize the Iraq Study Group, but he showed up at the firefighters' memorial today in South Carolina. Rachel Maddow, the host of the Rachel Maddow Show on Air America. As always, great thanks. Have a good weekend, Rachel.
Thanks, Keith. You too.
Here's your